Hello, my name is Elizabeth, and my case is on George Stinney. And George Stinney was an African American child who was wrongfully convicted of first-degree murder at the age of 14. He was the youngest person executed in the United States in the 20th century. George Stinney lived in Clarendon County, which is in South Carolina, and it's a small working-class mill town. He lived during the Jim Crow era, and like the other southern towns of the time, racism and segregation were heavily prevalent. On March 22, 1944, two young white girls, Betty June Binnicker, age 11, and Mary Emma Thames, age 8, were out riding their bicycle looking for flowers, and as they passed the Stinney's property, they asked George Stinney and his sister Catherine if they knew where to find maypops, the purple passion flower. But that day, the girls did not return home, and search parties were organized with hundreds of volunteers, all to find their dead bodies the next morning in a ditch filled with muddy water. Both little girls had suffered extensive blunt force trauma to the face and the head. In addition, Betty had shown signs of being sexually assaulted as her genitalia was bruised. Stinney was arrested a few hours later and was interrogated by several white officers in a locked room with no witnesses. Within an hour, a deputy announced that Stinney had confessed to the crime. Stinney's trial lasted only 2 hours. The police said Stinney, who is 90 pounds, 5'1", had confessed of wanting to have sex with 11-year-old Betty and could not do so until Mary, who was age 8, was removed from the scene. And so he decided to kill Mary. When he went to kill Mary, both girls fought back, and so Stinney just killed both of them. The weapon he presumably used was a 15-inch railroad spike that was found in the same ditch a distance from the bodies. It was later found that a beam, which the two girls had been killed, weighed over 20 pounds. It was ruled that George wasn't even able to lift the beam, let alone swing it hard enough to kill the two girls. Stinney's court-appointed defense counsel was Charles Plowden, who did nothing to help Stinney. In fact, Charles was a tax commissioner campaigning for election to local political office. Plowden did not challenge the 3 police officers who testified that Stinney confessed to the 2 murders. Despite this being the only evidence against him, and the prosecution had presented 2 different versions of Stinney's verbal confession, Stinney still lost. In one version, Stinney was attacked by the girls after he tried to help one girl who had fallen in the ditch, and he killed him in self-defense. In the other version, he had followed the girls, first attacking Mary and then Betty. But there was no physical evidence linking him to the murders. There's no written record of Stinney's confession apart from Deputy Newman's statement. The sole evidence against Stinney was the circumstantial fact that the girls had spoken with Stinney and his sister shortly before their murder. According to the accounts of deputies, Stinney apparently had been successful in killing both of them at once, causing major blunt trauma to their heads, shattering the skulls of each into at least 4 to 5 pieces. The next day, Stinney was charged with first-degree murder. The murders raised racially and politically charged tension. Townsmen threatened to storm the local jail to lynch Stinney. Not only was innocent George Stinney arrested, but he was left without his family support for his 81-day confinement trial. His father was fired from his job and threatened to be lynched unless he left town. The entire proceeding against Stinney, including jury selection, took 1 day, whereas the average proceeding today takes approximately at least a week, some a couple months. Stinney's trial did not support him. The jury at Stinney's trial consisted entirely of white people due to racial segregation, and so African Americans weren't even allowed in the courtroom. Other than the testimony of the 3 police officers, the prosecutors, and 3 unsubstantial witnesses, the man who discovered the bodies of the 2 girls, and the 2 doctors who performed the post-mortem, Stinney's counsel offered no defense. They did not call any witnesses, and they did not cross-examine the prosecution's witnesses. The jury took 10 minutes and returned with a guilty verdict with no recommendation for mercy. Stinney was sentenced to death in the electric chair, and when asked about appeals, Plowden replied that there would be no appeal as the Stinney family had no money to pay for a continuation. George Stinney was executed at the Central Correctional Institution in Columbia on June 16, 1944 at 7:30 p.m. Stinney was so small compared to the usual adult prisoner that law officers had to place books for him to sit on the chair, and they had such a difficult time securing the frame to hold the electrodes. The state's adult-sized face mask didn't even fit him, and as little Stinney was hit with a 2,400 volt surge of electricity, the mask that was covering his face slipped off. And when the switch was flipped, Stinney's body convulsed, dislodging the oversized mask and exposing his burning face to 40 plus witnesses. Stinney was declared dead within 4 minutes of the initial electrocution. From the time of the murder until Stinney's execution, only 83 days had passed. The social issue presented in this case is racism. It's the abuse of the powerless and those without enough social status and wealth. The abuse of these victims had caused immense repercussions and is exemplified in George's case. The essential importance is exposed due to an exertion of unequal power dynamics that emanate throughout the case. It's important to address these racial issues and inequality because they still pertain to today's time. Questions for discussion is, how can we really enforce right and wrong across culture and time when at certain times apartheid was legal, colonialism was legal, slavery was legal, and all these grave offenses to humanity were legal? And how can we, as recipients of a larger judicial system, combat the injustice of it all? And some important questions for the case is, who determines right and wrong? What is our standard? Especially when crime and punishment is involved and it's relative to location, time, and place, what is the standard? This case is exemplary of the unequal distribution of power and the dynamic effects it has. The case is exemplary of the unequal distribution of power and the dynamic effects it has. It's touched in Crime and Punishment and touched in Discipline and Punish. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov is the recipient of a lopsided power struggle, as he is an impoverished student that forces him into crime, as all odds for survival are against him. In Discipline and Punish, talks of reform being needed because of the unequal power dynamic is presented in Foucault's talks of the redistribution of power as a necessary means of our corrupt punishment system. He exalts a punishment system that is not concentrated at certain privileged points, nor too divided between opposing authorities. It should be distributed in homogeneous circuits so it's capable of operating everywhere.